Greetings and thank you for attending Being Heartful during election season and Grace Under Fire. My name is Theresa W. Wakefield Gamble, and I am a dual doctoral student with National University, Sanford College of Education, and my program of study is educational leadership. My specializations are trauma-informed practices and social-emotional learning, and I will be graduating next year in 2025. So let's jump right in. Grace under fire is something that a lot of times it deals with self-control. And in with self-control, you must have grace. And grace is tied to your character. And a lot of times in certain climates and spaces, that's not always possible. But I know when I was growing up in school, that was things that you just couldn't talk about. And that was politics and religion because it will spark this amazing, outrageous debate where people will lose friends and loved ones and families. And since the pandemic, I believe that is the environment and the setting that we have been in. And it's not because we can't talk about it. It's because people cope and deal with trauma and tragedy in different ways. And it is demonstrated through our different behaviors. So there are 5 questions, possibly, hopefully I can get through all 5 that we're going to be talking about today. The first one is knowing that the world is on fire. And how do you go beyond political labels? That's 2 questions in one, but to know that the world is going on fire, think about code of conduct. All of us have went to school. Matter of fact, let's start at home base. When we were born into this world, our parents raised us to how to respect each other, how to love each other, how to acknowledge adults that are older than us. And there was rules that we had to follow in the house. You had to be in by a certain time. You had to clean up. You had to prepare yourself for the week for school or make sure you're doing your homework. Make sure, when I grew up, when we went outside to play, we had to be in before the street lights came on, which was normally about 6 o'clock. And those were rules and stuff that we was taught at home. And then when we became of age, we went to school for 12 years, from kindergarten or pre-kindergarten to 12th grade. There was a code of conduct we were taught in school. It was things we couldn't say. We could not bully people. We couldn't disrespect school officials, school teachers, and educators, and those that helped and supported us during our learning journey. And then when we became old enough to work on jobs for employers, we had policies to follow. There was morals and ethics policies. It was, things that we could not do, we could not say to each other, to respect each other's spaces. And now it gets to a point, now we have to have legislation. That's why our criminal justice system comes in that created laws on how we're supposed to be able to behave and treat one another when we become an adult. But unfortunately, the last 4 years, many of us or people that we may know have forgotten all about the code of conduct. So that's how you know that the world is on fire, because people have forgotten the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you, or, treat others as you wish to be treated. Those are things that we have to and we must remember. And sometimes it takes others who operate in that space to do that. So in order to do so, we need to stay clear of labels. Just because I think different or I look different or I talk different from you or your peers or your family members does not give you the right to place labels on me because I'm different. And I think that is a lot of the reason our world is on fire, because many people are being afraid of what's different. Some things are dredging up from people past and childhoods that they may or may not were aware of that they were partakers of, because it depends on how you were told, how you were raised, and the reasons behind your actions and behaviors. So when we get to that place, when we recognizing, which is one of the steps in trauma-informed practices, when you recognize that you're operating in a space and in a behavior that's offensive to another person, then that's when we know the world is on fire. And then the next step, how we respond to people. Do you respond with labels? No, you do not. That's why we have to do more listening with our ears than we do with our talking with our mouths and using words, because words are powerful. So we have to avoid those. We have to have the ability to recognize and respond when things are going on in our world, to self-examine, to make sure we're not contributing, becoming a part of the problem, that we want to become a part of the solution. So the next question is, how has life prepared me to keep peace in the midst of a storm? Man, I have plenty of storms, especially growing up until this point. But the most recent one was last year when I found out I had a brain aneurysm for 12 years that went undiagnosed. And through grace, I'm still here. And because of that grace is because how I lived my life. In other words, how I treated people, how I stood up for injustices, and then how I shared compassion and love to those who didn't have compassion and love for themselves, but most importantly, giving grace. And a lot of times we don't know how to give grace, not to other people, but to ourselves. We're not perfect. We're not going to always get everything right the first time. That's the journey of life, is learning through life lessons, blessings, and sometimes obstacles and opportunities. They have a space and a place in our life through our journey that we have to be able to keep peace, even in a storm. Like right now, our world is very chaotic, and a lot of us are encountering people that we were friends with for decades, or either neighbors for decades. And this election season has caused people to really disregard the code of conduct, disregard grace, disregard treating each other like we wish to be treated. And some people are not good with dealing with conflicts. And conflicts is not to be avoided. That is part of the growth process in our life. So I have learned in the peace of a midst of a storm, and not to engage in the same mannerism or behaviorism of that individual. In other words, we have to be able to agree, respectfully agree to disagree. And a lot of people have forgotten how to do that. In other words, no, I may not see it from your point of view or believe in your point of view, but you have a duty to understand. And that doesn't mean you force someone's beliefs and principles upon them, but you are willing to have that ear to listen. And at the end of the day, it comes a point where you have to set those boundaries to make sure that you're not being pulled into a thought process or a belief system that disaligns with your belief systems. Once mentorship program I was in, a young lady had a great way to determine when you agree or disagree or something doesn't set well with you. She said, when you're asked to engage or participate or agree, and they want you to say yes or no or right to agree, if your whole body does not align with that statement or that question that you're being asked to co-sign with, then it's a no for you. So the way you disagree respectfully is your word choice. And sometimes we don't have all the information necessary in order to do that. For example, when my husband and I, offend each other, we have a system or a phrase that we use to alert one another when we feel like we're being mistreated or disrespected or being rude toward each other. And I will say, you're not being a good husband right now. Or he'll say, you're not being a good wife right now. I didn't put no label on him, but I reminded him, as a couple, he's the husband, I'm the wife, that even though we're married as one, we're still individual people. And we still have individual views. And when we know it's upsetting to each other, that is our phrase that we let each other know that something we're saying, something we're doing, something we're, complaining about is not helpful, or is causing a disturbance in my personal space. So that way it indicates, okay, I need to pause. I need to stop, or I need to apologize. And that's another thing a lot of people have avoided doing now during this election season. They don't apologize anymore. They don't hold themselves accountable. So accountability is pretty much gone out of the door. But what I do is I remind them, you know that that's wrong. You know that that's not the correct way you handle this matter. You know you have to remind those individuals of those ethical practices, that code of conduct that they grew up learning and complying with, because they expect it from others. So we should be able to expect it from them in return. So what is my why to engage with people? How do I keep it centered and in the front when I feel like it's slipping away? My why is, again, giving yourself and those people grace. But it's a certain amount of grace that you extend to an individual. You know, we make mistakes, we're not perfect. For me, when a person, realize they made the mistakes and they making the effort, that's the key word, making an effort to correct it and make it right, and being honest and showing trustworthiness, that's where you give those individuals grace to continue to engage with them. But then if a pattern keep emerging, that they keep doing it and keep making the same mistakes, may not be the same issue, but they keep making them over and over again, that means they didn't learn from the first time. But they still want to stay in your space and stay, connected with you. But that is where we have to still uphold our standards in our belief system, that you have to be able to, according to Tony Gaskins, you have to teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce. And when we don't do that, then that's where the lines get blurred, and then people feel like they can say or do or be anything around you, and that you have no standards or you lack standards. And that is not something we need to do, because our actions, our behavior is part of our character. And the only person that's responsible for our character is me, is you, the individual. So there are some self-care practices that I return to in times of uncertainty. And with my recent scare with having a brain aneurysm and had to undergo 3 brain surgeries in 120 days, it was a lot, not just for me, but for my husband. So I did get mental health counseling right after I had the surgeries, because I was still trying to process it all, because my urgency was trying to figure out how I can get help to save my life. So because I'm a highly multifunctional individual, I work a lot, I do a lot. I'm a real strong studious individual. I love learning, I love teaching, I love helping others. So I had realized during my therapy sessions just as much effort it takes and drives me to produce and pursuing a dual doctorate degree, running a multi-state consultancy firm for 10 years, being a wife of 38, being a grandmother of 3. I mean, all those different roles and hats I wore, it took just that much for me to do self-care. So I'd use diffusers with essential oils, things that help me relax, like lavender, rosemary, peppermint. And then I have instrumental music, which is piano instrumental music that I listen to. It's called Dappy T Keys on YouTube. That's Dappy, the letter T, and Keys, Keys. And I will play that along, whether I am working or I'm sitting down meditating, or even when I'm taking a nap or resting. So not just my physical outer person can calm down and settle down. I need my inner person to calm down and settle down, to reduce any anxieties, to tune out everything can be a distraction that cause all that anxiety, that excitement, that upward beat activity that keeps me on 100 when I really need to dial it down 50% so I can relax and maintain my high blood pressure, and not making sure I'm getting any headaches or anything aggravating. So I had to take that much effort to help with my self-care, making sure I'm drinking enough water, making sure I'm eating the right foods that doesn't trigger issues that's going to cause me to stay high strung, upset, because even what we eat and drink can cause behavior changes. And that's something, another thing that I do with self-care is watching what I eat, because it can also contribute to having contentious discussions and unnecessary arguments with peers and families and friends that you didn't intend to have, but what we eat tends to trigger that. You can't control your family's diet, but you can control your own. And that's where your boundaries has to come up. And that's where you're going to have to protect your peace by protecting your space. And then in doing so, that's self-care. In other words, getting back and forth with individuals who not willing to reason and understand, you have to be able to know when to cut off the conversation politely and walk away. For some people, that's hard. And it was hard for me because I'm a teacher by nature, and I always want to make sure people have a different perspective or a different understanding. But because I had to get to this space where I had to protect my peace, and people was constantly having a difference of opinion, especially during election season, especially during the pandemic and all the natural disasters we have gone through. I had to learn how to cut off. I've had to learn how to distance myself from certain people who I know goes down that rabbit hole that I don't want to go down. So you have to, it's okay if you have to do that. Well, you may say, Teresa, well, what if it's family members or somebody I live with? You still can protect your peace and separate your space from them and to know when you want to change the subject. It could be turning on some music. It could be watching, doing homework, reading a book, you know, letting them know, that, I have concluded my perspective on that discussion or that conversation. They may be upset. They may storm out. If they continue to go on, I normally would just leave the space. If that would be go outside, go walk outside, walk up, sit on the stairwell, go exercise, go run. You have to take those necessary steps and make those necessary hard fact decisions to get yourself in a place, a space and a place of peace. That's how you protect it, and that's part of self-care as well. The last question, how do I blend grit, tenacity, and heartfulness together? That is not an easy task to do. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's not easy, but over time it can be. Tenacity is, you have to be focused. I listened to a conversation with a world-renowned minister, and he was asked this question, and a lot of times he gave the analogy as if you're driving on the road and you got debris and everything flying all around you, different things going on around you that can easily distract us and get us focused off our goal. And the way you blend grit, tenacity, and heartfulness is to one is, you know what you can tolerate and what your capacity. You have to know what your capacity is, how much you can take on. And a lot of times we take on other people's burdens and problems when we shouldn't. And that's something I'm constantly working and practicing on, not to accumulate and take on other people's burdens that does not apply to me, I don't have that experience or that story to tell. You have to stay focused on you and your goal. And then the tenacity piece is to being able to say no or stop or no, I don't agree with that view. I never did. It's speaking up and putting yourself in position of what you will and will not tolerate. You have to make a stance in a position where people will already know who you are before they even approach you or ask you about different things. The grit is staying focused on the goal. What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to achieve? Because remember, your character runs across every mechanism of your life. Where you live, where you work, where you play, where you learn, where you worship. And even all of that is part of growth. So if you're going to act one way in one capacity and a different way in another capacity, it's inconsistent and it keeps you off balance. So it's hard to be heartful when you're different people in different phases and stages of your life. So being heartful is knowing what your choices are, knowing how to respect differences, knowing how to say no and mean your and keep your no, knowing how to protect your peace when it's something disruptive. It's not that you're avoiding conflict, it's just something you just don't agree with and you don't co-sign with. And no one cannot force you into something that you're uncomfortable with. It Sometimes we do it because it's family and we love them and we care about them. But if their belief systems and their practices and their morals and ethics and their code of conduct has shifted and changed, you have to ask yourself the question, is that something you want to be a part of, or is that something you want the world to put the label on you? Not you, but the world will label you for that. We hear this analogy of this saying is, we're guilty by association. And some people distance themselves from people because they don't want to be associated with that type of person or that type of mannerism or that type of behavior. That's how you have to blend your grit, tenacity, and heartfulness into one. Yes, that's my family. Yes, I love them, but I do not go along with their belief systems, their behavior, and their patterns and practices. You have to separate the difference, because if not, you're going to be adopted into a space and a belief system and a behavior that you'll be looking up wondering, how did you get here? So you have to know what are your goals is, what's your focus, what you will and will not tolerate. In other words, it goes back to the quote I mentioned about Tony Gaskins. You have to teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce. That's the tenacity piece. The heartfulness piece is giving yourself grace. You're not going to get it right, and you're not going to come out the gate doing it. You have to gradually work your way to it. But some situations will put you in predicaments you won't have that much time to get in that mindset. So you have to be willing and to be able to pivot and shift at any moment. So these 5 questions we just went through, knowing that the world is on fire and how do you go beyond political labels? Take the time and journal. How do you answer that question for you? And then number 2, how has your life prepared you to keep peace in the midst of a storm? How do you have peace in storms that you go through? And storms can be anything. It could be personal, it could be mental, it could be physical, it could be health challenges. How do you get peace in the midst of that? What keep you focused? What keep you balanced where you don't go off on the deep end and you lose it? Then number 3, what is your why of engagement? Why do you engage with that person, that organization, with that behavior, with that activity? And how do you keep it front and center when you feel like it's slipping away? That's with the people that we're surrounded. And then 4, what are self-care practices that you return to in times of uncertainty? In other words, when you can't talk to nobody that you feel you can trust with certain situations and information, what do you do to give yourself balance or to get back to balance? And then 5, how do you blend grit, tenacity, and heartfulness during during caring and engaging with the world around you? Because our world is different now. It is not like what it was before the pandemic. The residue was already there, but it's like the pandemic blew it all up and made it visible and plain. So I hope you take time and make sure you go through and you journal each one of these questions as your action plan, your blueprint, and your guide to help you during this election season. One thing I do want to say, you have to remember elections are important. They're part of our society. And we all do have the right to agree to disagree. But I urge everyone, always do your homework and do not rely on others' opinion. You do your homework and learn what you're voting on, why you're voting, how is it going to impact you on your everyday lived experiences. And last but not least, my final quote I want to say to you and encourage you with is listen before you talk, think before you act, The most powerful conversation often starts with your ears and not your mouth. And that's a quote that I've read on LinkedIn by Janice Bryant Howard, CEO of Acetone Group. And I'm going to say it again. Listen before you talk and think before you act. The most powerful conversation often starts with your ears and not your mouth. Now, we're going to get into a brief meditation, and I call it grace. You can have any kind of music you want. You know, my favorite music is Dappy TP Keys. Any one of his instrumentals are beautiful. It's piano driven, and because my late mother, is a piano player, and I used to play with her when I played the clarinet, so I love it. So we're gonna close our eyes. We're gonna position our feet flat on the floor. We're gonna calm ourselves. We're gonna tune out everything that's around you. Even though you may be in a noisy space, there are ways that you can tune out all the noise that is around you. And you're going to take deep breaths. You're going to take a big, deep breath. And you're going to blow it out. You're going to take another deep breath. You're going to take one more. Remember, you are giving yourself grace. And grace is what we're giving each and every day as we live. Then R is the release. We're releasing all those things that cause us so much stress around this election cycle. We're going to release everything we hear on the media, what we see on social media, what text messages we are given and sent. You're just going to release it all. And in doing so, we're taking deep breaths because we want to relax. We're going to bring our heart rate down because this election season can have us speed up our heart rate and it will trigger health problems. We got to take the moment to slow our heart rate down. Ignore what is around you. Your feet flat on the ground. For me, I envision I'm on the beach, sitting on the sand going through my toes. And the beach water is crashing, the waves crashing and coming in onto the beach, coming across my feet, coming across my toes. That is the A. We're acknowledging the opportunity to feel the earth under our feet. And as the waves come in, they go back out. As the waves come in, that means all the things that we have heard and seen. And then when we breathe out, we're blowing all the toxicity out, all the stress out, all the pain out, all the frustration, the aggravation, the tension, the tone, the negative encounters. We're blowing all of that out. We're releasing it from our thoughts. You even may want to release tears of the hurt that it caused. You cannot keep it bottled up. You have to release. Keeping those emotions bottled up creates stress. Keep breathing. In, out. In, out. Don't stop breathing. And then we have C. Choice. You have choices you can make. You can choose. In, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. So we did G for grace, giving yourself grace. We did R for release, where we're blowing in and out, just like the ocean waves come onto the land on the beach, and then they go back out. And then A, we're accepting and acknowledging the hurts, the pains, the stress, the toxic people, their actions, their behavior, the hurt. That's where we're recognizing and we're responding. And then C, we're choosing to protect our peace while operating in grace. You can choose not to engage with those of toxic behaviors. You can choose to correct their behavior by teaching them how to treat you, by what you accept, what you allow, and what you will react to. And then E, you're going to elevate yourself with grit, tenacity, and heartfulness. You're going to breathe in, and you're going to blow out. Breathe in, and you're going to blow out. Thank you so much for participating in this meditation with me, being heartful during the election season, and grace under fire. I am confident. I believe in you. You can get through this. Just do your homework, make your choice, do what you need to do this election season. That is a private civic engagement duty that you do not have to discuss or share. And remember, grace. Grace for you. Release, acknowledge, choose, and elevate. This is Theresa B. Wakefield Gamble, and I have been your presenter this evening, and I wish you so much success during this opportunity, and make sure that you are staying heartful despite the world is on fire right now, because it won't always be. So you need to be prepared and to be ready now. Thank you.